My own daughter looked me dead in the eye on New Year's Eve, in front of family and friends, and handed me a glossy brochure for a nursing home. "Dad, it's time you move out," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. That's when the room went quiet, and that's when it hit me. After everything I'd given, after every bill I paid, every sacrifice I made, I was nothing more than a burden to her. But what Fiona and her smug husband York didn't know was this. My name was the only one on that mortgage. They thought they could humiliate me, strip me of my dignity, toss me aside like last year's Christmas lights. They had no idea the storm they'd just unleashed. And I swore right then, as the champagne went flat and the laughter turned awkward, that they would regret underestimating me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I stood there with the brochure in my hands, the paper trembling, not because I was weak, but because anger and grief ran through me like electricity. I remember the day I signed the deed, the pen heavy in my hand, knowing I was honoring my late wife's wish to take care of our daughter. 3 years I lived in that house, paid every dime, mortgage, groceries, repairs. I'd even fixed the damn roof with my own 2 hands. And now I was disposable. People coughed, shifted in their seats, tried not to look at me. Fiona cleared her throat. York cracked a joke about finally having his own office. My blood boiled. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the one losing a home. They were. And so, with fireworks exploding outside, I made a quiet vow under my breath. You want me gone? Fine. But you're leaving with me. What happened next, they never saw coming. The morning after that disastrous New Year's Eve, I sat alone in a cheap motel room, coffee burning my tongue, my mind sharper than it had been in years. The silence was deafening, but it gave me clarity. I pulled out the dusty folder I kept buried in a drawer, mortgage papers, bank statements, every receipt I'd saved like a pack rat. And there it was in bold letters, black ink that couldn't be erased. Xavier Walker, sole owner. My name, not Fiona's, not York's, mine. I chuckled, low and bitter. All those nights York strutted around like a big shot, talking about my house, my rules. Every dinner Fiona threw, pretending she was a perfect hostess, in her home. The truth was staring me in the face. They were squatters in my castle. And now, the king was ready to take it back. I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and with a few taps, canceled every automatic payment. No more mortgage checks. No more utilities. The lights, the heat, the water, everything they took for granted, was about to slip right through their fingers. And let me tell you, pressing that little red cancel button felt better than any toast I'd ever raised. As the coffee went cold, I looked at my reflection in the motel's cracked mirror. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a tired old man. I saw a fighter, someone who still had cards to play. I whispered to myself, they think I'm weak. They think I won't fight back. Watch me. And right as I zipped up my bag to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Fiona, a picture of my grandkids, eyes red from fake tears. The message read, Dad, don't do this. Think of the kids. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. That was their first mistake. Because when you use children as pawns against me, the game changes. By January 2nd, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Fiona's voice messages swung like a pendulum. Sweet 1 minute, venomous the next. Dad, you can't just walk away. We have rights. Then York, slurring like he'd had one too many beers. Old man, you're not kicking us out of our house. I let them talk. Every word was ammunition, and I was saving it. That afternoon, I drove downtown to meet a man named Xander. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of attorney who smelled opportunity in every injustice. I laid the thick folder on his desk. He leafed through it, pausing only to raise an eyebrow. Mr. Walker, he said, sliding the deed back across the polished wood. You're the sole owner. Legally, they're just guests. You've got more power here than you realize. Hearing it from him, out loud, hit me like gospel. For the first time since that humiliating night, the ground felt solid beneath my feet. Xander leaned back, folding his hands. We'll draft an eviction notice. 30 days to vacate. They'll try to fight it. Of course, manipulation, threats, maybe even dragging the grandkids into it. But you hold all the cards. I left his office with the papers clutched tight, like a weapon forged just for me. Outside, the January air cut cold against my face, but I felt lighter, stronger. That evening, as I sat in the motel, my phone lit up again. This time was a voicemail from York, voice dripping with arrogance. "Try anything and you'll regret it. You're too old to play games, Xavier." I hit replay. Twice. Then I smiled. Because little did York know, every thread he left on my voicemail was another nail in his coffin, and I was more than ready to hammer it in. On January 9th, I decided it was time to stop hiding. Motel walls can only give you so much courage. Sometimes you have to step right into the fire. I drove back to the house, my house, papers folded neatly in an envelope. The driveway was littered with toys. York's truck parked like a throne he thought he'd earned. My chest tightened, but not from fear. This was resolve. Fiona opened the door, shock flashing across her face, like she'd seen a ghost. "Dad, you came back." Her voice softened, sugar dripping where poison had been just days before. York appeared behind her, leaning against the frame, smirk plastered on his face. "Finally realized you overreacted?" I said nothing. Instead, I handed them the envelope. Fiona's hands trembled as she pulled out the eviction notice, eyes darting back and forth across the legal print. 30 days? You can't, Dad, you wouldn't. But I did. York snatched the paper, read it, and let out a laugh too loud, too fake. "This won't hold. We'll take you to court. Tenants have rights." I leaned in, locking eyes with him, my voice steady as stone. "You're not tenants. You're freeloaders. And the law says you're done." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Fiona's shaky breath. She tried a different tactic, pulling her phone from her pocket, showing me pictures of the kids, wide-eyed and teary. "Think of Zaria and Wyatt, Dad. Please. Mom wouldn't want this." For a split second, the name of my late wife burned in my chest. But I stood firm. Your mother wanted me to take care of you, not to raise your husband, not to bankroll your life. York's smirk cracked, his face red with fury. And as I turned to leave, I could feel the shift. Power had finally changed hands. But deep down, I knew this was only round one. And York? He was the kind of man who'd rather burn the house down than admit defeat. The days that followed were a barrage of noise. Calls all hours. Texts that swung from guilt trips to threats. Fiona's messages read like a soap opera script. "Dad, we can work this out. Please don't ruin the family." Then 2 hours later, "You're abandoning your grandchildren. How could you?" But York went lower. His voicemails turned into a circus of arrogance. "You think a piece of paper scares me? You're bluffing. Old man. I got friends who'll bury this in court." I saved every single one, let them pile up like trophies. Each recording was another brick in the wall I was building against them. January crept forward, and every day the tension twisted tighter. I'd sit in that motel room, the glow of my phone lighting up the dark, watching unpaid utility notices roll in on their account. No heat, no hot water, no lights, and every cancellation felt like justice, a quiet strike they couldn't see coming until the walls of comfort crumbled around them. One night, York finally cracked. His voice came through the line, raw and desperate. "Fine, you want war? You've got it. But don't forget, you're nothing without us. You'll die alone in that empty house." I listened, calm as a man watching the tide roll in. Then I whispered to myself, almost amused, "Funny, you still don't get it. It was never your house to lose. It was always mine to take back." And the next morning, as frost clung to the windows and my phone buzzed with another string of threats, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Because in just a few weeks, I'd watch York pack his ego into boxes, and that image alone kept me warm. By mid-January, the cracks in their little kingdom were showing. Neighbors started whispering. How the lights flickered off for hours. How Fiona was spotted hauling buckets of water from a friend's house. York's swagger faded quick when the gas company cut service. I imagined him stomping through the dark, cursing my name with every frozen breath. On the 15th, Fiona finally cornered me in the grocery store. I was standing by the apples, minding my own business, when she appeared, eyes red, voice trembling. "Dad, please, we can pay you rent. We'll make it official. Just give us a chance." I studied her, the same way I used to study the fine print on contracts back in my working days. "Rent?" I said. 3 years, I paid every dime while you played house. And now you want to play tenants?" Her lip quivered, but I didn't flinch. The cashier shifted awkwardly behind us, customers pretending not to listen but leaning in all the same. Fiona lowered her voice. "Think of the kids. You're punishing them." I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm teaching you. The kids will learn something too, about choices and about consequences." York showed up then, storming down the aisle like a bull. "This is pathetic, old man. Everyone knows you're just bitter. You won't win." I lean on the cart handle, calm as Sunday morning. Everyone also knows who pays for that house. And come January 30th, everyone will know who doesn't live there anymore. The silence was brutal. People stared. Fiona pulled York away, her face pale. For the first time, I saw it, the humiliation sinking in. As I walked out with my groceries, I couldn't help but smile. That was their second public crack. And I was just getting started. January dragged like a long, cold shadow, but every day brought me closer to the end game. I kept a quiet routine, morning walks, coffee at the same diner, evenings spent reviewing my growing file of evidence. Bank records, receipts, utility statements, and those beautiful voicemails York kept leaving me. My lawyer, Xander, called it bulletproof. I called it poetic justice. On the 20th, York tried a new tactic. He showed up at the motel, pounding on the door like he owned the place. When I opened it, he barged in, chest puffed out, trying to make himself look bigger. "You think this scares me? You can't throw us out. You're just an old man with too much pride." I let him rant, pacing the room like a caged dog. Then I picked up my phone, pressed play on his last voicemail, the one where he threatened me outright. His voice filled the room. "You'll regret this, Xavier. You'll die alone." York froze. For a moment, the color drained from his face. I tilted my head, calm as a preacher delivering Sunday's sermon. "Careful what you put on record. Son, judges don't take kindly to threats." He stammered, fists clenched, then stormed out without another word. The motel manager, who had been eavesdropping from the hallway, gave me a nod of quiet respect. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance tip even further in my favor. That night, as snow fell heavy outside, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. "They're running out of moves." And deep down, I knew the checkmate was coming. But York? He was still too blind to see the board. January 22nd, the storm finally broke. Fiona called, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "Dad, we're sorry. York got carried away. We'll pay you rent, real rent this time. Just don't go through with this eviction." Her words cracked like thin ice, desperate, rehearsed. I let the silence stretch. Could almost hear her twisting the phone cord in her hand. Then I said flat, "You had 3 years to treat me like family. Now you're just buying time." She cried, begged, "Think of Zaria and Wyatt. They'll be scarred if we lose the house." And that's when I realized they weren't worried about the kids. They were worried about themselves. Because for the first time, they had nowhere else to run. Bad credit, no savings, no backup plan, just the cold reality of accountability. I hung up before she could finish. The guilt tried to creep in, my grandkids' faces flashing through my mind, but I reminded myself, boundaries aren't cruelty. Boundaries are love with a backbone. Later that week, York made his third and loudest mistake. At the neighborhood bar, loud enough for everyone to hear, he called me a washed-up geezer trying to play landlord. But instead of laughs, the room went silent. One of the guys at the counter spoke up. "Ain't that his name on the deed?" York's face turned red, his bluster shrank, and for the first time, the humiliation was public, undeniable. Word spread fast. By the next day, Fiona wouldn't meet my eyes at the grocery store. York kept his head down in the gas station. Their armor was cracking in front of the whole town. And as I watched their pride crumble, I knew the final countdown had already begun. January 30th was coming, and there was no escape. By January 25th, I could feel the tension humming through the walls of that motel room, like a storm gathering over plains. Every day closer to the deadline, Fiona's texts grew shorter, sharper, like little knives tossed in the dark. "Dad, please, just give us more time." Then, "You'll regret this when you're all alone." But regret? No. What I felt was focus. That afternoon, Xander called with a smile in his voice. "Mr. Walker, they've got no legal footing. Come the 30th. The sheriff will enforce the notice if need be. You played this exactly right." I thanked him, but truth be told, I didn't need the sheriff. I wanted York and Fiona to walk out on their own, their pride dragging behind them like a broken flag. That would be the real justice. The next day, Fiona tried one last card. She showed up outside the motel with Zarya and Wyatt in tow. The kids ran to me, clutching my hands, voices sweet and innocent. "Grandpa, don't make Mommy cry." Fiona stood behind them, eyes wet but calculated, like a stage actress playing to her audience. My heart ached, but I knelt down, kissed their foreheads, and said softly, "I love you both. But loving you means teaching your parents that actions have consequences." Fiona's face twisted, rage and shame battling in her eyes. She knew the performance had failed. She pulled the kids back to the car, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood there in the parking lot, watching the taillights fade, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man begging for respect. I felt like a man who'd finally taken it back. And in 5 days, that respect would echo through an empty house, mine again. January 28th arrived like the tightening of a noose. Just 2 days left, and the air between us felt electric, brittle, ready to snap. York made his last stand that Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in the diner, sipping black coffee, when he strutted in like he owned the place. Heads turned, forks froze midair. He slammed his hand on my booth table. "You think you've won? You'll regret this when the family disowns you. You're nothing without us." I didn't flinch. Instead, I slid my phone across the table, voicemail app open, his own drunken threats queued up. The speakers carried his words through the quiet diner. "You'll die alone in that empty house. Oh, man." The room went dead silent. Even the waitress stopped mid-pour, staring. York's face turned crimson, his mouth opening, closing, no sound coming out. For the 3rd time, he was publicly humiliated, stripped of his bluster in front of the very neighbors whose respect he craved. I leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "That house isn't empty, York. It's mine. And come January 30th, it won't have your shadow in it." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. York stumbled back, knocking into a chair, muttering something about lawyers before storming out. A few locals chuckled under their breath. One old farmer even tipped his hat to me. I took another sip of coffee, calm as ever, though my hands trembled under the table. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of victory drawing near. 2 days. That's all that was left. And on the 30th, they wouldn't just lose a house. They'd lose the illusion of control they clung to for years. January 29th was the longest day of my life. The clock seemed to crawl, each hour a slow drumbeat toward the inevitable. I stayed away from the house, though every bone in my body wanted to drive by, to see the chaos brewing behind those walls. Instead, I walked through town, nodding at neighbors who now looked at me differently, not as a tired old man, but as someone who had drawn a line and held it. That evening, my phone buzzed one last time. Fiona. Her voice cracked, but it was a different tone now, defeated, resigned. "Dad, we'll go, but you'll never see us again." I sat in the quiet of the motel room, the hum of the heater, the only reply. My chest tightened, not with doubt, but with the grief of a truth I'd known was coming. Sometimes justice costs more than you expect. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the kind I used to share with her mother on cold nights, and stared at the eviction papers lying on the desk. They weren't just documents anymore. They were symbols, proof that even in my 60s, even after losing my wife, I still had the power to stand, to fight, to reclaim what was mine. As midnight crept closer, I whispered to the empty room, "Tomorrow I go home." But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the image of Fiona's words, "Never see us again." It wasn't victory I feared losing. It was blood, family, the one bond even vengeance couldn't fully erase. And as I closed my eyes, I knew January 30th would be more than a move-out date. It would be the day I faced the cost of drawing that line in the sand. January 30th dawned sharp and gray, the kind of winter morning where the air cuts your lungs. I stood outside the house just after sunrise, the keys cold in my palm. My house. After weeks of silence, threats, and begging, today was the day it all ended. The driveway was cluttered with boxes and trash bags, piled sloppy like the last act of a rush performance. Fiona carried armfuls of clothes, her face pale and streaked with tears. York barked orders red-faced, his pride collapsing in front of the neighbors who peeked from their curtains. It was a final show, and everyone in town knew who the curtain call belonged to. I walked up the path slowly, deliberately, each step echoing louder than his shouting. Fiona froze when she saw me. York muttered under his breath, "Here comes the king of nothing." I stopped at the porch, pulled out the folded deed, and held it up. "Not nothing, York. Everything. And today, you finally learn it never belonged to you." The silence was suffocating. Even the kids stood still, wide-eyed, as if they felt the weight of history in the air. York tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in his throat. Fiona whispered something to him, and for the first time, he lowered his head. No words, no fight left. Just shame. I unlocked the front door, the sound of the deadbolt sliding back like thunder, and as I pushed it open, stepping into the empty living room, the smell of fresh paint I'd once rolled on those walls came rushing back. This was the moment. The battle was over. But as I set my bag down on the hardwood floor, I knew this wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about reclaiming myself. And tomorrow, the rebuilding would begin. That first night back in the house, the silence was deafening. No TV blaring from the living room. No York stomping around like a king without a crown. No Fiona sighing dramatically from the kitchen. Just me, four walls, and the low on the fridge I'd paid for years ago. I walked through each room slowly, my hand grazing the walls, remembering the sweat and hours I'd poured into keeping this place standing. The patched roof, the repaired plumbing, the paint on the walls. Every corner carried my fingerprints. For years I'd told myself it was for them. But standing there now, I realized it had always been for me too. In the bedroom that once held my tiny cot, I stood taller. That cramped little corner had been my exile, proof of how small they tried to make me. I stared at the empty space, and for the first time, I didn't see humiliation. I saw survival. Later, I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and stared at the eviction notice lying folded in front of me. Not as a threat now, but as a victory flag, the symbol of the man who refused to be erased. Still, the weight pressed heavy on my chest. I'd won, yes, but the cost was written in Fiona's last words. "You'll never see us again." I looked out the window. The yard empty. The swing set still swaying gently in the wind where Zarya and Wyatt once played. My throat tightened. I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I'd burned a bridge. And as the night stretched long, I whispered into the dark, "God, help me. Was it worth it?" The house gave no answer. Just silence, and the echo of choices I couldn't take back. The next morning, sunlight spilled to the bare windows, sharp and unforgiving. I brewed coffee in silence, listening to it gurgle and hiss like an old friend waking up after a long sleep. The house felt bigger now, emptier but not hollow. It was mine again, breathing with me, not against me. I spent the day unpacking the few things I'd brought back from the motel. A suitcase, some clothes, and the small wooden box where I kept my wife's wedding ring. I placed it on the mantel, right above the fireplace. For the first time in years, the house felt like it remembered her too, but the ghosts weren't gone. Around noon, I caught myself staring at the swing set again, imagining Zarya and Wyatt running, their laughter rising above the creak of the chains. My chest ached with a hollow kind of victory. What good is reclaiming a castle if the kingdom is empty? That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing, not letters of apology. No, I wasn't sorry for drawing a line, but words for my grandkids, stories about their mother when she was young, about the woman their grandmother was. Pages I'd leave behind, so one day, when they were old enough, they'd know the truth, that I didn't abandon them. I fought for myself, and in doing so, I hoped to teach them to fight for what was theirs too. The house was quiet as I set the pen down. Too quiet. And then, just as I started to climb the stairs, headlights swept across the front window. A car idling out front. My heart pounded. For a split second, I thought, had they come back? I stood frozen in the hallway, the beam of headlights cutting across the living room wall. My mind raced. York? Back for a fight? Fiona? Maybe with one last plea? I walked slowly to the front door, each creak of the floorboards louder than my own heartbeat. Pulling back the curtain, I saw Fiona's minivan idling at the curb. She sat behind the wheel, motionless, her face dimly lit by the glow of the dashboard. For a moment, I thought she might come to the door, but instead, she just sat there, staring at the house she no longer had the keys to. Minutes passed like hours. Then the passenger door opened, and I caught a glimpse of Zaria's small face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and searching. My chest tightened. The girl raised her hand as if to wave. But Fiona yanked her back, pulling the door shut before the gesture could land. The engine roared, tires crunching over the frozen street, and just like that, the van disappeared into the night. I stood there long after the sound faded, the silence heavy as stone. They hadn't come to fight. They'd come to look. Maybe to remind themselves what they'd lost. Maybe to show the kids what happens when you burn bridges. As I turned away from the window, I felt the ache settle deep in my bones. I had won. The house was mine, my dignity restored. But victory felt more complicated than I'd imagined, because revenge can give you back your pride, but it can't bring back family. I whispered into the empty room, "One day, kids, one day you'll understand why I did this." And with that, I climbed the stairs, each step carrying me closer to the final chapter of this war I never wanted, but had no choice but to finish. The morning after they drove away, the house was quiet, but not the same empty silence I'd known before. It was different, calmer, settled, like the walls themselves had finally exhaled. I stood in the kitchen with a mug of hot coffee, staring at the eviction notice folded neatly beside the deed, the two pieces of paper that had changed everything. I walked to the living room window and pulled back the curtain. The swing set swayed gently in the cold wind, a mirror of that New Year's Eve when everything shattered. But now, instead of bitterness, I felt something else, resolve. This was my home again, my kingdom, my sanctuary, my proof that even at 61, you can draw a line in the sand and defend it. Later, I opened that little wooden box and slipped my wife's ring onto my palm. I kept my promise. I whispered, I took care of her. Maybe not the way we dreamed, but I didn't let her fall. The ring gleamed in the morning light, no longer a symbol of loss, but strength, the compass that had guided me through betrayal. Neighbors passed by, tipping their hats, nodding with respect. Word had spread. Xavier Walker wasn't a man to be pushed aside. And York? Fiona? Their names were whispered now with pity, not admiration. They'd lost more than a house. They'd lost face, pride, and control. Publicly, irrevocably. As I stepped outside, the winter air crisp against my skin, I felt the catharsis I'd been chasing. Justice had been served, not with fists or fury, but with patience, strategy, and truth. I locked eyes with that empty swing set and allowed myself one last promise. Zaria, Wyatt, when you're old enough, you'll know your grandfather didn't just take back a house. He took back his honor. And with that, I closed the door behind me, the sound of it echoing like the final gavel in a courtroom. The revenge was complete. The man they underestimated had risen, unbroken, unbowed, and undeniably free. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.